navigating family conflict. Who should I say? Who has ever been a part of a family conflict? Don't raise your hand because that would be all of us, right? Of course, anytime we're in relationships or anytime we're in a relational setting, um, we're individuals, we're different. And so there could be conflict that would arise out of anything. The book of Genesis has a lot of family connection stuff in it, and there will be family conflict when we go back that far in the beginning, and we begin to see how things play out, how things come together. So, well, that's where we're going to be over the next few weeks, 6 weeks, and it'll be a good study. Just because if you want to know why things are the way they are, go back to Genesis. If you want to know why things are supposed to be this way or why things ought to be in a specific way, just, go back to Genesis, and Genesis will help you. I'm not sure I turned chat off on this. Sorry, I didn't want to have that on. But anyway, so don't comment to me because I'm not going to comment back. All right. Okay, good. Um, First of all, we start, of course, with Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, at the very beginning of Genesis. And so we'll just kind of start there. How's that sound? The book of Genesis. Genesis is the word itself means origins or beginnings or the mode of formation. Those are kind of some definitions for Genesis. Genesis would be more the Latin derivative or that kind of word. When you go to ancient Hebrew, the word would be brashith. The Hebrew word is brashith, which means beginning or at the start, a beginning. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Hebrew, brashith, bara, Elohim, eighth Hashemayim, wa eighth haaretz. Now, why I have that memorized, don't ask, but I do. Genesis 1:1. And so beginning, or it just is an understood beginning. He, namely God, Yahweh, bara, Bereshith bara, he created, and or he produced, is kind of another way to look at that. God created out of nothing, and he didn't look around the universe and say, "Oh, well, here's some stuff I could use for substance." No, he made the substance, and so that's what those words, that's what that terminology tells us. The Latin is ex nihilo, out of nothingness, God made. Out of nothingness, he created. There was a nothingness, and then it came into existence. And I don't know where your science falls or where you do whatever, but mine begins with a theological bent, and that is that God made, God created, God produced. He produced it, bara, and it came into existence. Well, we know the story. And by the way, first 11 chapters of Genesis, first 10, 11 chapters. If you want to know beginnings, if you want to know why things are the way they are, that's where you need to go. You don't start history at Genesis 12, or you don't start theological history at Genesis 12, where God called out Abram to come and be faithful. It begins long before that. Okay? All right. So we're going to go to Genesis chapter 4, and we kind of need to make sure we remember what happens in between. Genesis 1, God made. He made it on 7 days, or in 6 days, actually. Made it in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested. What does that mean? Were they literal days? Were they 1,000 years? Well, it says later on in Scripture, a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years, or 1,000 years is like a day with the Lord. Does that reflective thought there. And so I don't know. I'm a literal 6 day person. as far as creation goes, because I don't think any job's too big for God. I think he could do it in 6 days. Matter of fact, I think he could have done it in 6 hours if he had done it. But he did it in days, which spreads it out for us to understand that our day, beginning to end, is designed and has been made, created by God. So God made on the sixth day, he made man in his image, and by creating man in his image, then um, um, uh, he breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul, a living entity, and like God, separate from God. Godly traits, um, but separate. And then um, out of the relationship that what God had with man, he created a woman, and so there was the the counter, or the like but different, uh, the man and the woman, and God made them for procreation. He made them to be able to um, reproduce and to subdue the earth and to have dominion over it and to be fruitful and multiply. And so that's that's the way that God set it up. That's the way God did it. And so then we see in Genesis 2, there's a retelling of the story, which gives us a little more insight, gives us a little more perspective on what God was doing. Then we come to Genesis 3, where there's a counteractive force that comes into play. Satan comes in form of a serpent. He tempts them. They are led to the place where they succumb to sin. Adam and Eve first, then Adam. And then because of their disobedience, because of their not listening to God and following it closely, then God puts them through this process of curse. Because when you disobey God, a curse will follow. When you don't do what you know you ought to do with God, you choose the curse. We're told when they went to enter the promised land, the end of Deuteronomy, Joshua said, blessings, or Moses said, sorry, blessings and cursings, life and death. I put this before you. You can choose blessing. You can choose cursing. You can choose to obey. You can choose to disobey. One leads to life. One leads to death. You've got that choice. God gives it to you, and so you can do as you see fit. Well, so Adam and Eve had the choice. They made the choice, and they made a bad choice. And so then the taint of sin has covered all of us, because now out of that, the procreation, or the multiplying of people on the earth, now comes with that taint of human sin. Did I catch up on all that stuff? Maybe. So we enter in then where we have Adam and Eve. They are out of the garden. They've been kicked out to the east, and they are in the process of um, building a life. And so that's where we kind of begin today. We're going to see in this passage out of Genesis, the being fruitful and multiply, them doing what God said, doesn't come without pain, doesn't come without labor, doesn't come without the curse. And then we're going to see how the curse continues to affect. And so anytime there's not good family things, come on in, guys. Anytime there's not good family things, it's because the curse has affected, or the curse has either one. They're for you. So we're just glad to see you. All right, and we're diving in here. So we're I just have been given about 10 minutes of background stuff that may or may not matter. All right. Okay, so we're ready to start. And our title of our lesson is Cain and Abel, Family Responsibility. And so here we go. Genesis 4, verse 1. It says, the man was intimate with his wife Eve. If you're in the King James mode, it says Adam knew Eve, and it uses the one's leader and one is not, Ryan. But it doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. And I don't have another one. So, oh, did you have one you were reading?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. So it just has a little more stuff in it. So, stuff. You like stuff? Oh, good. Good. Okay. So, it says man was intimate with his wife Eve. That means they had sexual relations. That means that he knew her. And that term knew in the Hebrew means that it was just an intimate way. We see that term a lot throughout the Old Testament. We'll say that he knew this. It means that he knew it in a very intimate way, knew it in a very deeper way. It wasn't just that he knew it as a fact. It was mean that he knew it intimately. Okay, so he knew her intimately, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. Okay, son number one. And she said, I have a male child with the Lord's help. Well, that is kind of what Cain means. Let me see, where is that? Cain means have gotten. So what did she get? Well, with the Lord's help, she has gotten a son. She's gotten a child. Okay. And then in verse 2, it says, she also gave birth to his brother Abel. And now Abel became a shepherd of flocks, but Cain worked the ground. So out of this, we see, individuals are different, aren't they? Immediately, God created man in his image. He had Adam, and then he took a rib from Adam's side and made Eve. Two like in beings, and yet individually unique. And so here they have two sons. They are like because they're sons, but they are individual. One liked to farm. Cain was a farmer. He would have been a sodbuster, they would have said in the old days. And then you have Abel, who was a shepherd, or he was a flock person. He took care of animals. And so, gosh, isn't that the way you kind of choose your vocation? Well, okay, sometimes we have to do what we have to do to make a living, but isn't that how you choose your vocation? It's what you like to do, or if you don't like it, you find something else, right? That's how we do it. Okay, and so that was the way it started out. Cain and Abel, two sons, and one liked one thing, one liked another. They were different. Abel's name means breath. So, we don't know. Was Cain a rough child? Was he a bad baby? And then Abel came along. Oh, he's a breath. Maybe he's a breath of fresh air. Or maybe he was just easier. Maybe he just had a different disposition. Well, we're going to see that he actually did have a different disposition. He became the shepherd of flocks. And the word flocks, we think of sheep. We think of flocks of sheep or goats. But it could be any kind of animals, anything that they would have used to produce for food. But they also would have mostly at this time, they would have been producing that for skins, for the clothing, because you'll recall when Adam and Eve sinned, they were in the garden naked. They had nothing to hide. But then once they sinned, now they realized the guilt of sin. And so now they're hiding. They got their own little leaves and covered themselves. But then God said, well, that's not going to last. That's like buying it at Walmart or something. I'm going to make you something good. I'm going to get you something leather. So what did he do? Because of their sin, he made a sacrifice. God sacrificed animals in order for them to be covered, for them to be clothed. And that's significant in the fact that God requires sacrifice. When there's sin, God requires a sacrifice. And so he sacrificed the animals, and they got clothes then. So now what do you got to have? Well, you got to have food to eat. You got to have clothes to wear. And so you got to work. And so here they are. Cain worked the ground as a farmer. Now, before you start getting ideas, and I don't know if you've seen those old Western movies where they had all the fights and all the wars between the sodbusters and the herders, the cattlemen and all those things, and in the West when they were fighting over the land and stuff, you know, one isn't more honorable than the other. Think about that. Both are necessary. Somebody's got to do it. Man, if you don't have a farmer who's out raising grain, uh, well, what would people eat? What would they do? I just don't know. If you don't have somebody who's doing that, if you don't have somebody who is producing meat, of course, we're carnivores now, but that didn't happen for a while in the ancient world. Um, that's another topic for another day. But here we are today, and that's a necessity. Here we are in good old St. Jomo when the stockyards made the town in a lot of ways years ago. So I mean, you have to have those kind of things. We're all different, but yet we are uniquely the same makeup because we were made in God's image. Okay, so different individuals, but then we're going to see that we do different things, and as they were doing different things, they made different offerings to God. So in verses 3 through 7, it says, "In the course of time, Cain presented some of the land's produce as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also presented an offering, some of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offering. Cain was furious, and he looked despondent. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you furious? And why do you look despondent? If you do what's right, won't you be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it.'" Oh, man. There's a lot of discussion about why was Cain's offering not accepted? Why was Abel's accepted? Has nothing to do with the offering. Has nothing to do with what they put on the altar. Well, has some to do with what they put on the altar, but not a lot. So here's the story. Course of time. Over time, these guys grew. They became men. It does no good for us to discuss how long was this. We don't know. Is it significant? Nah. It does us no good to decide or talk about where did their wives come from. We don't know, do we? If God wanted us to know that, he'd tell us. He would have told us other things. So we don't know. And really, it serves no theological purpose for us to know or to do or to understand any of that. We don't understand it. But we do know that here they were, they became men, and it came time for them to offer a sacrifice to God. Have they done it before this specific time? Maybe they had. We don't know. We're not told. But here they came to this time when they were going to give offering. Now, how did they know to give an offering? Well, I believe it's because Dad, Adam, had done it before them. And they'd seen him do it. And as the father who was, trying to probably train his sons or teach them in the right direction, I'm sure he'd told them, "Look, guys, now that you're of age, or now that you're men, or now that God is blessing you and you're really producing, you need to offer a sacrifice to God." This is different than like a tithe sacrifice, or it's different than I'm paying homage to. This is simply a offering. This is simply, I'm just going to give this to God. And you might be thinking, how did God receive that? How did God accept that? We don't know, because we do know that when they offered sacrifice later on in the temple, that you gave it to the priest, and then the priest, for his own sustenance, got to keep some of it because he couldn't go out and make it on his own. And really, the priest wasn't making any money. You might give him some alms, or you might give whatever, but he was living his life as service to God in your presence for you. And so we don't know about a lot of all of that. We simply know it came time for them to make a sacrifice. And so what did they do? Cain brought some of the land's produce as an offering. Why? Because that's what he had. That's what he did. Now, there's been a lot of debate about, well, maybe God wasn't going to accept that. No, folks, one isn't greater than the other. As you read through the book of Leviticus, you'll realize that God instructed them to not only make blood sacrifices for sin, he instructed them to make other sacrifices of grain and other things in their lives. To him out of obedience to God, that they were to do that. So Cain presented, or he rendered his offering to God. It's a free will. He did that not because he was required, not because it was commanded. He simply did that as a free will. Product of the soil is exactly what he had. We don't know what kind of grain it was. Doesn't matter. It was what we might call, or what they call later on in the Old Testament, a cereal offering. And so it was just simply an offering to God. Abel, however, then it tells us, he presented his offering. And now notice it was the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. When it talks about fat portions, it means they were not little babies. They were not, just weaned. They were filled out. They were ready to eat. They were ready to go to market, kind of things. And so his offering came from his flock. Now we do know that the blood sacrifice is necessary to cover sin, but this was not a sin offering. This was just an offering. Not out of obedience, or not out of they weren't compelled to do this. They were just doing it in order to honor God. It was just true offering in the sense of the word. But we do know that Abel's offering was better. When we get to the Old Testament deeper on, we'll see that sometimes God said, you need to bring the first fruits. If you're going to make an offering, bring the first fruits, which meant when you go into harvest, and when they would go into harvest things, they would go right into the middle of the field and they would get the best out first because it was the best. That was the first fruits. They would go in and they would cut that out, and then they would kind of work their way out around the field more in order to get other things, but they would go in and get that first fruits first because it was the best. You and I know that. If you're growing green beans, that first picking is always the best, isn't it? You and I know that the first okra you cut is always going to be the tenderest, always going to be the best tasting. You and I know that, man, when you shuck those first few ears of corn, it's really good, right? Of course, some of that is the later may even be better, but just something about getting fresh ears, it tastes good, doesn't it? So it's possible that Cain didn't bring the first fruits. It's possible that he didn't do what was right in that regard, but we're not told that. What we're told is that he didn't have a good attitude about it. When you offer a sacrifice of anything, you should have a good attitude. If you do a good deed with a bad attitude, it's not a good deed, is it? It's a bad deed. You're sitting in traffic, and some car wants to cut in and get in front of you, and you say, okay, I'll let him in. Is that the right attitude? No. It's not the right attitude. You should say, glory, hallelujah, I get to let this car. No, I'm not. That's a little extreme, maybe. But you should say, hey, remember the time that someone did that for me. Hey, remember how I needed to be over in that lane, and nobody else was going to let me in, and then this other car did. And think about how that made you feel. And then think, okay, I can do this. I can be kind. I can be nice. I can do whatever. That's just one example. But folks, having the right attitude and the right spirit of it is really what the difference was here with Cain and Abel. One was accepted, one was not. Which that says to me, when I come to worship God, whether it's privately in my own, you know, by myself, or if it's with a group, when I come to worship God, it's pretty important that I check my bad attitude and that I get on the right frame, isn't it? It's pretty necessary that we would do that sort of thing. So, the Lord was telling Cain that he didn't do it the way that God would have wanted him to have done it to be acceptable. And God knows our hearts. He knew the heart of Abel. He knew the heart of Cain. I've kind of likened this to a test. Abel got an A, Cain got a C. Why did he get a C? Well, he didn't flunk. He got a C because he just didn't have a right attitude about it. But because he let it get to him that he made the C and his brother made an A, then what does that do to him? Well, then God says to him, he says, why are you so furious? Well, and I didn't get to verse 5 where he says, he looked despondent. Some translations say his countenance was angry. Some will say that he was red hot. He was mad because he did all this stuff, blah, 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 took care of all this, and then it wasn't even good anyway. We get kind of that way sometimes. We can. And so God said to him, why are you furious? Why do you look despondent? Or why are you so mad about it? Look, you got to see, study harder next time. Do your best. Don't just come haphazardly to class. God's telling him, come in prepared, come in ready, come in with the right spirit and the right attitude. God wasn't saying, oh, whoa, Cain, you're not any good. I'm going to wipe you off the face of the earth. No, that wasn't even in God's mind. He's got the fruit of what he instructed Adam and Eve to do, be fruitful and multiply. He's not about to do that at this point. But he certainly doesn't want Cain to do what he did either. So what does God say to him? He says in verse 7, if you do what is right, won't you be accepted? In other words, just study harder next time. Come back next time with a better sacrifice. Do what's right, and you might be surprised how God blesses you. Might be surprised how he deals with you out of that. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. In other words, the devil's got his foot through the door of your heart. And once he gets his foot in, you're going to allow yourself to be tempted to do something stupid. And he did. Okay? Okay, it doesn't say stupid. I threw that in. But that's what it says. And we know, all of us, because I'm not going to ask for a show of hands who's been tempted to sin. All of sin comes short of the glory of God. We understand that. God said to him, its desire is for you. In other words, sin wants to destroy you. Jesus said, the thief comes but to steal and to kill and destroy. He said, I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. So you make that choice. God said, you must rule over it. Well, then, about out of time. Got to get to the last. Verses 8 through 12 says, Cain said to his brother Abel, well, let's go out to the field. Hey, come out here. I want to show you something. Ha, ha, ha. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Why would you lie to God when God already knows? I don't know. And then he gives this age-old question. Am I my brother's guardian? Am I my brother's keeper? And I can just see God looking at him saying, I'm not going to answer that, dude. I'm not going to do it. You know better than to ask that. But he did. And then he said, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." So what had Cain done? He killed Abel, and then he buried him. He buried him in the field, in the dirt that had already produced plenteous things for him. He put his brother in there. How low can you go, right? And so God said to him, "His blood is crying out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed," he says in verse 11, "alienated from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood you have shed." And he says to him in verse 12, "If you work the ground, it will never again give you its yield. You will be a restless wanderer on earth." So here he has been a farmer. Here he's been there. If we read the next following verses, we'll see that Cain complained. He whined about it, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I can't be a wanderer." What that word means is you will never have home again. Whew, that's hard, isn't it? And so we read in the next verses that aren't in our lesson, but basically he whines and says, "Oh my gosh, if I don't have a place to be, if I can't protect myself, if I don't have a shelter, everybody's going to be out to get me. I'm going to be, the punching bag of the world." And God said, "Well, we can't have that, and I won't allow that to happen." So he put a mark on him. We don't know what the mark was. We don't know if he just put a spiritual force field around him that kept people from doing that. We don't know what that means. There's a lot of speculation in that. Probably none of it's right. When we get to heaven, that might be a good question to ask. If we have time to ask those kind of questions, we'll be too busy worshiping. So, we all have different destinies, don't we? Sometimes we choose that destiny. Sometimes we could have chosen a different destiny if we had trusted God more in our lives. Well, so there we have it. We have Cain and Abel, age-old story, and we see that there really is a family responsibility that we really do need to watch out for and take care of each other. We're not alone. No man is an island. It doesn't mean that I'm always accountable for your sins, nor are you accountable for mine. But it does mean that we do have to work together. We do have to function together. We really are our brother's keeper, guardian, however you want to put that. Okay? Well, next week we'll move on because there's lots of good family relation stories in the book of Genesis. God bless y'all. Bye-bye.